Next, the death of the EDL. Douglas, this week you had the pleasure of interviewing Tommy Robinson, who was head of the EDL until quite recently. What did you make of him?
Well, it was an interesting encounter. As I said in the piece, I had met him once before, pretty much just the exact time that the EDL was founded, when he and his cousin Kevin Carroll came to something which I was doing, a public interview in London, and they came over, and at that point, they were of the type of person, let's say the type of appearance, the demonstrations appeared to be of the type of appearance which one would normally associate with the British National Party. So it wasn't my politest moment, but I told them to F off fairly repeatedly and not very politely. And F off they did. And I remember Tommy Robinson saying, we understand, etc., etc., you don't know who we are, but just wanted to say we're not racists. We're just working class guys who are losing our country and can't bear it. And I'd remembered that in the year since. I'd followed, obviously, like most people, had followed the progress, as it were, of the EDL with interest and horror and concern. And I think a lot of people have felt a great concern about it. And so I thought it was a very interesting moment last week when he left the EDL along with his cousin and said he could no longer control the really far-right elements that were circling around the EDL and had got involved with it. And he came out of the EDL through the Quilliam Foundation, who as you know, are a group of ex-Islamist extremists who have now become counter-extremists. And I was called last week by somebody, not at the Quilliam Foundation, but another Muslim who's a close friend of mine who'd been speaking to Robinson, who said, would you like to speak to him? Would you like to hear what he has to say and hear him out? So I did.
And what did you make of his reasons for leaving the EDL? Because the far right of British politics, the BNP have pretty much collapsed. They don't really play as an entity anymore. Replaced, some may say, by the EDL. Is this the wane of the EDL now?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it'll certainly clarify the matter. You're right, the BNP has collapsed in recent years. My own instinct from the beginning, and I read about this and got a certain amount of flack at it at the time, was that there was too much eagerness to paint the EDL solely as a far-right, fascist, Nazi, racist organisation. And I personally have a great concern about this, because I think we rightly exercise great concern in describing any gathering, grouping, community of people, and that there is a sort of glee and a desire to denote certain groups as far-right, racist, fascist, and so on, without actually finding out some of the complexities, which may well include that, but some of the complexities which lie beneath those sort of names. I think it is important to hear why a group like that formed. I think it's very interesting indeed, I say in the piece, to hear Robinson talking about the groups that, as it were, circled around him and his organisation. He says that he tried to keep out genuine, racists, fascists, real, BNP types. And then when he was in prison earlier this year, he says that one of the people he'd been trying to keep out was speaking on stage, and he thought, well, if it's always got to be me keeping them off the stage, and then when I'm not there, they stand up, and I'm the public face and so on, I don't know if I can have anything more to do with this. And, I think there's been a lot of guffawing in recent days about this claim of his, but it seems he seems to be sincere about the fact that he doesn't want to lead a racist, fascist, far-right organisation. That isn't why he started this. That isn't what he was about. He started it because he had concerns about what was happening in his hometown of Luton. He had concerns about Islamist extremism, and he then sort of found himself starting one protest and then being the head of this movement, which became very, very ugly.
It's one of the things that you were saying in the piece that Robinson acknowledged, that the message, the cause of the EDL, whatever that was just lost from the outset. And I think if you ask your average person on the street, most would probably say thugs and louts, that's what the EDL has become known to. So
exactly.
There's this void now, and that Tommy has left the EDL. There is a good chance it will just become a group of thugs, and I doubt the police will very happy to let them exist for that much longer. What then happens? Will there be something that fills that void, or is there? What do you see as the future of the far right in our politics?
Well, the far right is always said to be rising because it's a sort of good story, and a lot of people like it and find it sort of sexy, weirdly.
Pretty true in France, though.
You could say that in France there is a serious story of that. In Britain, there really isn't. For all of the sort of Nick Griffin stuff, seriously, the BNP, the real far right, does not pose any serious problem in Britain. But I think that there is something, and I mentioned it in passing in this piece, there is something which should give people pause for concern about this. When the Dutch MP Geert Wilders started his anti-Islamic party, the Freedom Party in Holland, he had no members. He's the only member of his party. And as I understand it, he did that because he believed and knew that if you opened a party up in Europe of that kind, the first people to come would be the skinheads and the thugs, and then the sort of middle-class people and working-class people and others who were concerned about similar issues simply wouldn't show up. And the EDL's trajectory has been very interesting in that case, because having said that they wanted to start out highlighting Islamic extremism and so on, undoubtedly nobody listened after the first few words. Very few people looked beyond the first impressions, and that does raise an issue of its own, and a democratic issue, which is how people with concerns about these very serious issues could express them, could get involved. There is undoubtedly, as with so many extremist issues, a disenfranchisement issue. Tommy Robinson told me, he said, neither he nor anybody he knows votes. And I would simply say that it would be very unwise to completely ignore some of the concerns which the EDL has expressed, even whilst being very concerned indeed with the tactics and some of the things that are said.
And finally, what can we expect from Mr. Robinson? Do you think he'll stay in the limelight?
I don't know. I mean, he has a trial coming up next month. He has had numerous charges against him. Another one for obstructing the police has just fallen down earlier today in court. He has undoubtedly been given a right going over in the last few years, and he was beaten up again in Luton by a gang of Muslims the other night, and it was caught on camera. I suppose he would probably want to keep his head down a little bit. But I mean, one thought which I put in the article and we'll finish with is that, one of the things that you can't help reflecting on is that if the far-right Islamists who Tommy Robinson says he started out in order to tackle had been treated societally or by the police and authorities with anything like the kind of venom and vitriol and attention that perhaps rightly Tommy Robinson had applied to him, then I suspect we would never have heard of Tommy Robinson or indeed the EDL. But the inability, it seems to me, of Britain to notice the difference between primary problems and the secondary causes and responses to them, I would say remains almost endemic.